Hi, welcome to my channel. I'm Katja, and there are two wolves inside of me. One has autism and one has ADHD. Sometimes they fight and sometimes they're friends. Come sit with me on this couch, relax, and let's explore the ways these two things interact. So, today we're going to be talking about why autism confuses so many people. I decided to take a deep dive after my own experiences. I was like, you know, this doesn't happen with ADHD. People are kind of like, okay, yeah, you got ADHD, got it. I mean, maybe this happens, but in my experience, it's just happened more with autism. And I'm just sitting here thinking, like, why is that? Why is there not like a global consensus on what this means? And I realize as a person who struggled with mental health that there is a lot of confusion around a lot of mental health diagnoses. I found an article that I'm going to be referring to as I go through this topic. All right, so this article is called Three Reasons. Let me get the water off my face. Got water on me. Okay. This article is called Three Reasons Why Not to Believe in an Autism Epidemic. Now, I don't know about you, but during COVID or a little bit after, I remember a lot of autism content coming up online and a lot of people really relating to it. Um, I think afterwards, when I started looking into it a little bit more and then talking about it with my psychiatrist, at the time, that psychiatrist told me that no, everybody is getting diagnosed and thinking that they're autistic. This kind of thinking is what I think the authors are talking about when they're talking about an autism epidemic. Like when people are saying, yeah, everybody thinks they're autistic these days, but like some people are actually autistic, that kind of thinking. So the writers of this article are Morton and Gernsbacher, Michelle Dawson, and H. Hill Goldsmith. I'm gonna just link the article in the about section, the description. So, what they define as an autism epidemic in this paper is a rapid escalation in the prevalence of autism for unknown reasons. Then they go on to say, no sound evidence indicates that the increasing number of diagnosed cases of autism arrives from anything other than purposely broadened diagnostic criteria coupled with deliberately greater public awareness and intentionally improved case finding. This meaning that it's not that the number of people is higher that have autism. It's just the number of people who are diagnosed and found to be autistic or have found out that they are who found out they are autistic has increased, aka awareness has increased, and also the diagnostic criteria has broadened. So that's something I'll be talking about first. Well, the diagnosis of autism has changed over the course of years. The idea of autism, or the phenomenon of autism, it says here, has existed most likely since the origins of human society. In retrospect, numerous historical figures fit autism diagnostic criteria, but were not so diagnosed in their day. And it wasn't until the 1940s that autism became an idea. Like it became thought of as differences in social interaction, communication, and having focused interests. And it was categorized by a man named Leo Kanner. Okay, so this is like just in the last century that this has happened. In 1980, the DSM 3 had 6 mandatory criteria for identifying autism, and that increased in 1994 DSM number 4, that offers 6 optional additional criteria, and a, a, a client or a patient only has to meet half of those criteria. So you see that the idea of what autism can look like is opening up, is broadening. And some of the criteria, the way that they describe it is like different. So, like, this is a great example. The way they used to describe certain behavior in autism was bizarre responses to various aspects of the environment. Now, just in that language, you can hear how it's an outsider looking in, and you can picture somebody watching someone and thinking, I don't understand the way that they're behaving. This is bizarre to me. So, what their notes say, bizarre response to various aspects of the environment. As some understanding has evolved, this has changed to persistent preoccupation with parts of objects. A very different way of thinking about things. There's more nuanced and a detailed look at what the behavior is. So instead of just thinking, well, that's strange, I don't get it, and writing that down, you can see how psychology has influence by human psychologists, and their perspectives. So instead of that confusion, instead there's this noticing, oh, the child or the person seems to be having a kind of fixation on a specific aspect of an object. So that's a great example of the way the diagnostic criteria has changed, but isn't necessarily fully changed. Does this make sense? So, it's not that the behavior has changed, it's that the understanding of the behavior has changed. And so now that there's that idea, more people can be thought of as autistic. Let me go forward. Also, this whole article is from 2005, so this stuff has updated even since then, I'm sure, but this is what I was able to find. Okay, so there's this other weird study that came out. um Let me just get into it. So this section of the paper is called the California data. In California, people with autism, at least at the time of this being published, qualified for services administered by the statewide Department of Developmental Services, the DDS. They saw that from the 80s to the 90s, the number of people being serviced who were autistic increased by 273%. This surprised them, so they decided to look into it. When they were asked to look into it, they found that it wasn't because of um, a broadening of diagnostic criteria. This this paper argues for the idea that them not thinking the broadening of criteria was the reason is false. A study was conducted with two sets of children. One set was from they were born in the 80s, and the other set was born in the 90s. They used the same diagnostic method or assessment method, which was an interview with a clinician, with a care provider. And both groups came out with the same amount of autistic diagnoses. The kids found to be autistic were dramatically less likely to have intellectual impairments in the second cohort. 61% in the earlier cohort were identified as having intellectual impairments, and only 27% of the children in the more recent cohort were so identified, which just goes to show that there's a difference in the way that autism is being seen and understood. So in math, did you ever learn about rectangles and squares, and how squares are considered rectangles, but rectangles aren't considered squares? So that's like saying, okay, in the first group, all of the kids are rectangles. I don't know if calling them kids works, but it's in the first group, you've got a bunch of rectangles and squares. You look at it and you're like, okay, all the rectangles are rectangles. In the next group, in the 1990s, you got squares and rectangles, and now the diagnostic material has recognized that squares are also rectangles. You see squares and rectangles, and you kind of are okay, the squares are also rectangles. The difference was so slight that it doesn't even make such a big percentage shift. So the reason that there was such a big increase in how many people were diagnosed was because they're looking at the data from a decade apart. And if they were to show from year to year, the increase wouldn't be so drastic, it would be more gradual. But since they're looking at it as the diagnostic criteria is changing and that their like ability to notice the different criteria is changing, more people are getting diagnosed, then yeah, the increase goes up by a lot. But it's like saying, it's like back in the day they thought like everything was caused by like the fluids in your gut or something like that, the biles. And it's like if you were to say from like that time to now, the increase in depression has increased by like 10,000%, I bet. And it's like, well, no, we just know what depression looks like now. So that's why it looks different. But the issue is they use this kind of like idea or evidence, quote unquote evidence, like they still use it on like papers and stuff, like articles and things like that. Another reason why it seems like autism has just like completely increased like so much is because in 2003, the Autism Society of America found that the number of students with autism from ages 6 to 21 in American schools jumped 1,354% in an 8-year period. What they failed to note was that prior to 1991 and 1992, there was no child count of students with autism. Therefore, autism didn't even exist as an idea reporting category. So it's kind of like, okay, we didn't even know autism existed, and now we're reporting autistic people in schools. And so it's just also jumping like, yeah, it increased by 1,000% because like there were 1,000 something kids with autism. That completely makes sense. Okay, so I read another article called "Shining a Light on a Hidden Population: Social Functioning and Mental Health in Women Reporting Autistic Traits but Lacking Diagnosis." So this is kind of talking about why autism isn't seen in women or noted in women. The most relevant, I think, factors about this is that women are socialized differently. And so, well, first thing is that autism is just considered a male condition. And autism traits in girls can look really different. Like women can have fewer social difficulties. They might internalize their symptoms more, and they have typical restricted interests. So they could be really interested in horses or drawing or reading. And those things are like thought of as like girly and therefore good and not anything to raise a flag. But the just because they weren't noticed doesn't mean that there weren't sensory issues happening or kind of ways of avoiding social difficulties, or there are ways of masking that were incredibly effective, I guess. So, why is it important for people who don't come off as like autistic in the stereotypical way? Why is it important for those people to be diagnosed or to have some understanding around the possibility of being autistic? That's because high masking and an intense level of sensory issues or intense loneliness from lack of socializing in ways that feel fulfilling can lead to really poor mental health. It can lead to self harm, depression, anxiety, things like that. A recent investigation of the clinical histories of 61 autistic adults, 22 women, and 39 men found an average of a 10-year delay between women having first contact with mental health services and being diagnosed with autism, which is considerably longer than for men. And it says that women were more likely than men to be misdiagnosed at their first evaluation, and that the most common misdiagnosis for women was a personality disorder, which was 36.4%. And if it says, it goes on to talk about like if misdiagnosis is a part of the person, if misdiagnosis results in inappropriate treatment and support in addition to further delay in gaining an autism diagnosis, then it is likely to exacerbate mental health problems. So if you're getting the wrong meds and the wrong treatment, then it's just not treating the actual underlying problem. And then it talks about the idea of camouflaging or masking as using an intense amount of mental and emotional load, and requires a lot more thinking on one's feet and pattern recognition and performance in order to perform, and that can lead to burnout. So I think that that covers what I was trying to get at, which is that the diagnoses of autistic people is really changing drastically as time goes on. If you speak to somebody who isn't up to date on this information, they may consider autism to look like something specific. It may look like uh, intellectual difficulties, lack of communication, repetitive behaviors, and what's more recently been found is that autism can show up differently than what was initially thought to be the case. So, autism can look like social difficulties that could be more internal. There could be a lot of camouflaging and masking happening that allows a person to be perceived as being successful in social interactions, but internally is not showing their true self, or is working extremely hard to keep up with certain conversations or seem as though they're keeping up. um, and there might be quite a bit of loneliness going on in the background, and repetitive behaviors might look different than hand flapping or spinning. They could also look like organizing things, or doing routines in really specific ways, or blinking hard like this, or doing like interesting things with their body or face. And those kind of like more muted, more, they're not muted. It's like you could be clenching your toes in your shoes all day and nobody sees that, which is doesn't make it not a repetitive behavior. It's still a repetitive behavior even if people aren't seeing it. The idea of what autism is gradually expanding, and so people are not caught up. And that's why you might have an uncle or a friend who says, "Oh, I know somebody who's actually autistic," and you're not it. um yeah, you can send them these articles and tell them, you know, pick your battles. But I'm just here to tell you that you're valid, you make sense, and I'm really glad that you're finding things that you relate to. So let's just keep on keeping on and continue learning about ourselves so we can learn how to support ourselves. If you liked this kind of content about going through a scientific paper and kind of making it a little more digestible, let me know in the comments. If you like this video, give it a like. And if you want to see more of this kind of thing, subscribe. And I hope to see you soon.